Hi, so I'm Max Tatton Brown, and this is Claude Code Curious, where we talk to some of the people from our events about where they've come from, how they got into AI stuff, what they're building, and where they think this is going. Today we're talking with Kim, who I'll allow to introduce himself in just a second, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about how he's gone from these really quite big, significant, meaningful companies to getting out there for himself and building his own stuff. So Kim, please tell everyone a little bit about who you are, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. Well, yes, I'm Kim. I'm originally from Barcelona. I'm aware that doesn't explain my accent. I don't really know where that comes from. I lived in many different places, but it does explain why I'm in a good mood and such a beautiful sunny day as today. Yes, where I come from, following Barcelona, studied at a business school, started my career at PepsiCo, but I came in year 2009 to the UK to launch GiftGaff, the mobile network. And it's a business that I was involved mostly throughout my tenure of 10 years as a C-level director. I was chief commercial officer, leading product, leading marketing, leading at times the commercial side of the business. So it's a very rounded, very challenging role, big role, which I really did enjoy. And following that, I moved on to Check a Trade. I was there for 4 years as both chief product and chief marketing officer. And more recently, I was at Gumtree, and I've been there for 2 years, still supporting them on an advisory capacity. But it was earlier this year that I decided to go all in with AI and start my own business and start exploring different opportunities in spaces where I thought that businesses were not making the leap yet, which is around data. So most people, when it comes to like prototyping or using large language models to draft, let's say, a blog, then that is like a low risk scenario. But when it comes to working with your own data, the risk of hallucination is a lot more challenging to address. So, and it does become very interesting in terms of how you address those challenges because it's a very different way of working. And I thought I wasn't able to do that while I was a managing
Yeah,
director of Gumtree. And I decided, well, I think it's just the right time to see if I can
yeah.
start my own business.
In terms of that background, were you always building things? Like, how technical were you before you even started to look at these kinds of opportunities from the AI wave?
My background is in business and I majored in marketing, but it is true that when I look back, I think I was the techie one within the group. So I won awards for building websites when I was at business school. I actually built the first student website. That's before Facebook took over the world. And when I was at PepsiCo, even though I was a product manager for a brand called Matutano, I also realized and did remind my line managers regularly that there was no corporate website. There was no PepsiCo Spain or Portugal. So after giving them a bit of a hard time, they asked me to do it for them. So yeah, I was building
Interesting.
websites even at very early on in my career. I knew that I wanted to be in tech. And when the first opportunity came at uh, launching GiftGaff, that was really the start of my career in tech, and I've never looked back.
Okay, so you felt tech came quite easily to you, right? That world was intuitive to you, and even web technology was pretty much in your grasp, it's fair to say.
Yeah, and it's both. I think it's that interjection of marketing and digital product. It's the user experience, which I was very drawn by. So for me, it was very obvious where things weren't working or the experience could be better or is a bit clunky. Yeah, I was quick to identify that. And that is what very early on in my career in tech, let's say at giftgaff, even though I had a marketing role, I was very quickly asked to support on all things product.
Okay, so it sounds in a way your skill was understanding what was possible a lot of the time, knowing it well enough to be able to say, we should be doing this, or, this could make a difference for the business.
Well, exactly that. I mean, for me, it felt, especially when you're starting a business, that product is everything, right? And if you don't have a good product, doesn't matter how well you do your marketing. But this transcended even further. So when I went to Check a Trade or even at Gumtree, my lens was always on product because I knew that that was going to be the determining factor to help the business grow and scale marketing is become a bit more commoditized over time. And yes, you need to have that creative discipline and come up with ideas for you to stand out from the market. But where I thought, at least for these businesses, or tech businesses, product businesses, where things matter the most is on defining exceptional experiences. And that's what's defined my career.
It is the best marketing as well, isn't it? Right. I think a lot of marketers, some marketers, reach a line eventually where they realize actually all this work shouldn't be just going into outward facing stuff. It should be going into what we're choosing to build and how to get it out there. So I think that's really interesting. So then you're working at obviously Gumtree, and the AI ChatGPT moment, whatever pops up. I mean, was that the moment for you, or how quick were you to that? Do you remember those first experiences of this LLM wave and what you thought?
Yeah, I think I was one of the first users, one of the first subscribers of ChatGPT that I know of. I was very drawn to it. And I realized actually when I was talking to peers, because there weren't that many of us, let's say 2, 3 years ago, that were investing in these tools or spending time with them, I realized that it was more like my Spanish community. It tended to be people from outside of the UK that were used and but they had to work in English, that were using it most because it was a blessing, right? We spend so much time where, English is not even my second language, my third language after Catalan Spanish. We spend so much time wordsmithing and ensuring that we're communicating effectively and using the right vocabulary, that when you got an LLM that can do all that for you, it's like, wow, it's just saved so much time for me in terms of drafting this perfect email, or ensuring that this presentation is as clear and concise as possible. And as a marketeer, this was so useful. But then I quickly started realizing that, well, there's so much more I can do here. Well, it's going to help me with my job description. It's going to help me with, let's say, a request a PR. It's going to help me define my next project. So there's so many different things that I was starting to use on that it was, but looking at the stats of 2025, I was within the top, I think it was 0.1% of ChatGPT users. I was using it for nearly everything. But yeah, everything changed when I got close to code, when I got close to Claude Code, because that's where the opportunities were way
Yeah,
broader than something very simple, which you just a
yeah.
QA.
So you're a Gumtree, you're building things, you're kind of really supporting the business. Why rock the boat? What was it that really inspired you and gave you a sense you want to get out and go and do your own thing?
So I was realizing that at Gumtree, there was quite few things that I felt we should be doing with AI, but at the same time, even myself, I was doubting, am I going to regret this? Is this solution ready enough? Should we be really adopting it? Should we be experimenting with this? And I just don't think we were that effective. We were definitely using AI in our
Mm,
day to day, but more at a
mm,
superficial level. But I was starting to think like this should be driven operationally from the deepest level, and you'd almost have to rewrite the rules of how to do business, how to run product and tech through AI as your backbone. And I just felt very uncomfortable with even making those proposals at a board level because I wasn't convinced myself. And I thought, well,
mm.
I want to try it out. I want to see if I can make this work. Um, and I couldn't do that on top of my day job, right? And
Yeah.
after a few conversations, it's also true that a lot of the areas that I was very involved in were gradually moving more to be driven led from China. So a lot of the product and tech and data teams are now in China. I felt, well, this is a good time for me to transition into an advisor role and see if I can make this work. And that's what I've been doing. And I'd say, look, 3 months in, I've definitely been able to validate a lot of my hypothesis, but I've also realized there's quite a few challenges with working with AI, and you need to be very aware that it's a very different way of working. It's a very different discipline. Skills that are required are quite unique. As you say, maybe that judgment of knowing what good looks like and what to expect and what let's see where you want to be at the end of a project is crucial. um, but getting there is still not something that I find as obvious, because it's almost like a foundation is not stable. Like you, I'm building a lot of the foundational layers through scaffolding and through
Mm.
these MD files, scales, hooks,
Hmm.
however you want to call it. But still, the predictability, especially with working with
Yeah,
data, is not at
yeah.
100%.
So let's talk about some of that then. Today, when you're setting up a project, you want to give it that scaffolding, give it that security. How do you go about it? What are the things you've learned that now for you are, I would never ignore that in future?
I would say, and this is one of those tricky ones, right? Because when you hear people from the Anthropic community, let's say Boris Cherny, for example, or people that are very involved in this, they say, don't scaffold. Like, your models will be eating your scaffolding for breakfast. But I just haven't been able to trust the models entirely for not to have that yet. I'm hoping they're right one day. I don't know if it's the new Mythos model, whatever comes up next, that will give me that full confidence to say, I'll just ask you to do something and you're gonna give me a straight answer, which I can trust, but it's just not like that today. So let me give you an example of an initiative I started doing. I was working for charity organizations. At Gumtree, we do sell dogs and cats, and I had the opportunity to connect with a lot of welfare organizations that care a lot about dogs and cats. And they were asking me questions that I thought, well, I'm sure I can find that out, not only for Gumtree for sure, but for the entire market. So, how many dogs are sold in the UK? That's probably an easy one to answer. But what are the top breeds? Maybe that's a bit more tricky. Everyone has its own definition of what a breed is. How do you work with that data? How do you parse it and how do you aggregate it? How do you dedupe it, etc.? And then on top of that, the more complex questions would come. Well, how many Labradors above 8 weeks of age have got a microchip, right? And I was able to start getting into that world. But when you start working with that type of data, you realize that the models, even the most sophisticated models, and I only work with Opus 4.6, so you can imagine how much token expenditure I've got at the moment. But yeah, they're just not solid enough to help you capture that data and work with that data. There's a lot of manual intervention in terms of looking at the data. You're trying to build data and ask a lot of questions and query that data from lots of different angles in order to gain that validity that, yes, this is right. This sounds right. This looks right. And every time I check individually that page, it's right. So when you get
Yeah,
to that level, then it's when you can trust it. When you've got one
let's.
good run of data, then you can you can use that as your model, right? Into your model of
Yeah,
reference for future models.
yeah. So, and do you think some of this is based in maybe some of the engineering and architecture discipline that no one ever teaches you when you start to build these applications? Because one of the things that's interesting is it's so easy to get something live with a great front end experience, and it can edit it really easily and get you very, very far. But as you get into retrieving data, storing data, reconciling it, checking it's accurate, all of that, the back end still feels like something maybe it helps for engineers to have to hand to say, to have someone who can give you some good advice, right? There's a lot
Absolutely.
to
And
learn, I think.
I've been very fortunate with that. So Tom Pandolfo, who also joined one of your events, has been a great assistant. He was the chief data officer at Checkatrade, and he's been really helping me understanding the frameworks where I was getting things wrong. Because I guess for me, coming from a marketing background, it's more like where's that dashboard? I'm just going to ask for that dashboard, and I just want to see how many pets for sale, how many dogs for sale are there in the UK, and I expect an accurate and quality answer that I can start diving deep and getting more granularity, but then you soon realize, no, this doesn't work. But I gotta be honest, most of it I figure it out intuitively or with the Q&A that you get from working with Claude Code. So what I started realizing is that one thing is the extraction layer, right? So that's accessing data from the web, let's say, and extracting all of that and having that in one, let's say, repository. And once you've got that data, you need to run your evals because you want the volume and the depth to be as accurate and representative as you possibly can do. And that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of time to get right because every platform's different. Every platform has got its own peculiarities. And yeah, being in a position where you can understand that is key. Following that, it's is a canonical layer. And this is where I'm moving data from multiple platforms into one database that is comparable. So it's got the same date formats, it's got the same breeds, it's got everything that I can kind of accumulate from different places and I can read and I can understand. Then from there, you got the analytical layer. And the analytical layer is when it starts working with the data, like how many Labradors above 8 weeks of age have got a microchip. That is done on an analytical layer. And then the final one is the presentation layer, right? But if you don't build these layers, once you see something on a presentation layer and it's not right, you just don't really know where it went wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas you need to spend time on each one of these phases in order to ensure you've got a very high quality dashboard at the end of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the questions that is odd now is where you draw the line to then ask somebody else for help. Because you can spend a lot of time on a challenge where somebody who knows what they're doing, like Tom, might come in and just build it for you. And that line's not entirely obvious now because you can ask advice a lot of the time. You can intuit it for yourself. But it's also easy to lose quite a lot of time trying to do something that is actually a pretty solved problem. That question of partnership these days, I think, is really interesting. And we built this cast platform for Claude Code Curious to replace Slack. And I was working with John, who's a member of the community, on it. And it was one of the most incredible, satisfying moments when he started contributing pull requests. And it was like working with an AI, weirdly, in that it just felt amazing. His work was getting done. I didn't have to do it, but it was also coming with that expert lens of all of his experience working at the BBC and building all these big things, you know. And I wonder if in this first, let's say before Christmas is the mark, we're at 6 months or more, slightly more of people really getting stuck into building things. I wonder if we'll get to a bit of a graduation point where people then start to collect together more and more and realize that you're not just twice as effective working in a partnership. Now it's actually, I think, a magnifier. And I wonder what the perfect team size is too. A lot of this stuff, it feels like we're just getting started, really. We have no idea yet.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. For me, it's been fundamental to connect with people from the space that I'm in, people who have done similar things, have done it before. Very often, though, they haven't done it with the tools that I use. And often I'm actually saying, no, I figured out doing just this and that. Like, you know, very senior data leaders just get very impressed with what I've been able to achieve. I've got 27 agents working right now, and they're collecting data from 6 different European markets, many classified organizations, and I'm able to present a lot of data that is very relevant from wealth organizations, but also government bodies, and at the same time, businesses with brands in the product space that tend to spend tens of thousands of pounds to access the type of data that I'm able to provide. So it, it's it it's definitely not necessarily a smooth process. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, it's very easy, just talk to this person and they'll figure out this, or just follow this process and you'll get it right. I think it's inevitably going to be a phase where you've just got to muddle through this. You've got to figure it out for yourself. You got to make your own mistakes. You got to learn this pain, because only through that will you be in a place where you're fully confident of the product that you're building. I'm a big fan of dogfooding, as they call it in the States, right? Trying your own dog food, trying your own products. I've always done that throughout my career, and this is no different. Even though it's not effective, it's not efficient, getting to learn the pains and seeing the problems that I encounter and having to work back from it, I think it's ineffective. It does feel like a stress achiever mentality, but I think it just sticks a lot more.
One of the liabilities here is you fall in love with building more than you fall in love with doing, really putting something in the world. But look, I'm interested. So you've obviously gone out, you're doing this for yourself. It sounds like you want to do everything yourself. You plan to be a one-man band with your 27 agents doing it all. Is that right? Is that the long term? How do you view business building in this time?
It is definitely where I see the biggest opportunity right now, because it helps me to learn from the ground up how to build organizations that are AI native, AI centric. And yeah, I guess I need to spend a bit more time here just to figure out if I can make this business work as well, and then if I can make it scale. But inevitably, yeah, of course, I will reach a point where it's not about, adding another 27 agents, the answer. You probably need to start bringing in team members to help to assist you. But it's also true that, the more I think about these team members and the type of people that I need, they're probably very different. I don't know if they exist because they are a hybrid, right, of many different disciplines that I've worked with before. They need to be technical, they need to be commercial, they need to be analytical. It's not that common that I've worked with people that are passionate about all these disciplines, right? But I think that's what's going to happen in the world of tech. It's more and more the type of leaders, the type of profiles, the type of people that are drawn will be far more generalist than what they've been in the past.
And as you described what that is, though, it feels like co-founders. It does feel a little bit more, you go back to 100 years ago and two retailers decide we're going to go and do this together because we are both super smart and we could try and do it alone, but we'll do it much better together. And that's the best kind of team because it's not based
Mm.
on kind of total dependency and like, oh, I don't know how to write code, so I need a coding guy. It's based on you're the smartest person I know, and I want to do this with you because we are greater than some of the parts. And there's
Mhm.
something really nice about the purity of that. In
Yeah.
terms of what you're working on, then, obviously you've described a little bit of the work, but tell me about other projects, maybe even also some dead ends where you explored something and learned something really interesting in doing so.
I think there's a lot in tooling. I've been experimenting as much with what I'm doing as with how I'm doing it. And throughout
Hmm.
this year, I was giving, steers, including from yourself, Max, to try this tool here or try the system there. And some did stick, some did not stick as much, right? So, um, one of them, for example, when I wrote a blog post a couple of months ago, I said I'm using Super Whisper, and people told me, oh, you should try Whisper Flow. I tried Whisper Flow. Actually, it is a bit better, and that made a difference. And I transitioned to Whisper Flow. I'm mostly talking, on my laptop. That's why I'm usually with microphones, and I'm prompting my way to everything that I build. And I learned that again from listening from the best of the best, right? So the founder of OpenClaw, Peters, was one of the big advocates of this and started to think about using it that way. Also, it took a lot of inspiration from Dave Keeling, who worked on a personal assistant. He calls it Dex. And I took a lot of that to build a bit of my infrastructure, right? So I've got a system that's taking care of my calendar, plus my email, plus my WhatsApps, plus my Slacks. It's all connected, and that's the beauty of Claude Code. Even though it's a bit daunting having to operate in a terminal environment, which I still do because it's quicker and a bit more agile. I've tried it all. I've tried the app. I've tried different systems, layers, VS Code, Cursor, you name it. But I've gone back to very basic. I turned to terminal windows and just working on them one at a time with different agents. That is the best solution for me. But yeah, that's the best solution for the type of business that I'm running, of course.
But I also wonder about that, where there's a very famous meme that starts with, sort of total amateur, a novice, and there's like, very low on the graph. And then it gets kind of busier and busier and busier, and it gets fuller on the graph, and the person's losing their mind. And at the end, it goes down again, and they're like a Jedi. And I do think, again, it's one of those journeys I'm seeing a lot where people start, don't know what's going on. You install loads of plugins, loads of stuff, loads of tools, loads of new things, which is natural. And then you whittle it back down to actually just the right little resource for you, the
Yeah,
genuinely useful stuff.
exactly
I
that.
wanted to ask you about I wanted to ask you about working with voice with these tools because I do feel like there's something that does feel different about dictating your thoughts, about literally thinking out loud. And I wonder if you find that, if you found it awkward at first, if you find there are certain tricks to how you work using your voice that are worth discussing here.
Yeah, this is something I wrote about actually, because 35 years ago, my dad did not allow me to go to these fast typing courses. He believed that at the point that I start working, I will be talking. I will be talking to my computer. And yeah, for 3 decades, I was a three finger Kim. I was typing on my keyboard, so I was never a very fast typer. I found it, well, it's necessary for me to do my job, but it's not necessarily, I think, a keyboard the ideal tool to input the information. But it's true that throughout those 30 years, that voice recognition transcription just wasn't that effective. It just didn't work very well. Still today, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's got to that point where it's actually good enough. It's good enough for me actually speaking multiple languages. I can switch from Spanish to Catalan to English, no problem, and it's automatically detected. So I write a WhatsApp in a perfect Catalan. I've never written perfect Catalan. Now I do. So, and as a result of these tools, in particular Whisper Flow, I find that I can. It's more effective. But then on a more emotional level, yeah, I don't know. I think as humans, we are built for oral communication more so than we are built for typing. And there's something about having that conversation and being able to look at the screen while I'm talking rather than putting a comment in a document in writing while you're looking at the document, looking at the keyboard, all of that, it's always been clunky. So for me, it was quite quick, maybe, I don't know, a week, maybe 2 weeks, where I was at a point where going to a keyboard was almost, it felt like going back to pen and paper. Like, why would I do that? Right? It's become very natural very quickly.
Have you found though it changes the kind of ideas you have or the way your thought process works though? Because I find initially the obvious thing about it is it's dictation, which means you're not typing, which is great. But equally, there's a freedom to just talking and following a chain of thought and knowing that it's not costing you anything, you're not getting RSI, no one's listening, no one's going to laugh at you. You can explore it to an extent. But I don't at the same time know that everyone feels that way. Or I don't know that in some ways you're talking, you're not filtering yourself in the same way you are as when you're typing. So maybe there's something authentic there. Like these things really interest me, but do you feel any of that too? Or is it really just the dictation?
No, there is an element of that. It's different, right? Because you're right. When you're typing, maybe because I'm a slow typer, I'm a lot more thoughtful about what I'm typing. And then I'll read, I'll type. And when you're doing like a very deep thought process, it's there's some validity on that. But at the same time, there's huge value of I've just got this idea and I want to quickly try to interpret it and have the conversation with an LLM solution that is gonna interpret it in its own way and then play it back to you. And that back and forth, even though it's, the first input is very imperfect, but it comes back with something a bit more solid. And you're like, that doesn't look right. No, I meant to say something else. It was this and that. Oh, and then, oh yeah, now that makes sense. And then you start building and building that type of model of working with an LM, I think is far more effective through voice. And I think it ultimately results in higher quality output and quicker output. So it's almost like the best of all worlds is working through voice in my experience.
I'd love to talk a bit more about the agents you described. So 27 agents is a lot, even if you're into agents, right? And so I'd love to understand why 27? Why not 100 or 5? How did you design that? What have you learned about making agents in a way that makes them really useful? So tell me that, and especially any mistakes and things that you regret. That's always the good stuff.
Hmm. I think the backbone of my agents would be Dex, which is like my personal assistant, and it's become a bit of like my orchestrator of agents. So it takes care of my communications. It's got the repository of different people. It's got a repository of all the meetings, all the transcripts. Everything's kind of in this ecosystem, which is a system with memory. And and that's become incredibly powerful for me. So that coming into every meeting or every conversation or every day, I've got all those repositories that I can easily access and get ready for a meeting or make sure I follow up on next steps or make sure that I haven't missed anything on a specific conversation. So all of that being connected is super powerful. Then in terms of, but yeah, all these systems, they just lose context as much as you try to put files and you try to put all the scaffolding around it. The moment that the conversation drags or you try to get into more complex tasks, you realize like, well, you just can't do more than one thing simultaneously, right? So one of the rules for me was when I'm about to get into a complex task, let's say, I don't know that this tomorrow I'm going to start working on the landscape of dogs and cats for the UK market. that's a specific agent. That's going to take me several days to get a quality output, and it's going to be several interactions, several slides, documents, dashboards. There's a lot of work on data to get there. And then as I start working with different customers, they got different needs. That tends to be a different agent.
Interesting. So you're treating them as a real commodity. You're not trying to create 5 agents that you work with for the next 5 years. You're saying for every use case, you're not even bothering so much with skills. You're using agents almost instead of skills in some situations. Is that right?
I would say so. Yeah, I guess skills are often transferable between different agents, and I kind of ask. It's very often like when you're if the way I think about it, imagine you're in a sales department, right? And you're presenting to one customer, and then you say, well, I'm going to present now to another customer. Well, often you'll use a template, right? You're going to take that presentation, uh, and you're gonna do a copy of that presentation, and you'll start editing, changing the logo, changing the data. You just got a few things there, but a lot of the infrastructure tends to be a bit the same, but you got to really tailor it to make it very valuable, very relevant to that customer. So for me, it's also because it just helps cognitively, right? Compartmentalizing things in a way that I've got this agent that takes care of this situation. Sometimes it wouldn't justify it, but just mentally, it helps with the click. And not all my agents are active, by the way. I mean, the vast majority are dormant right now, but I've created an infrastructure that allows me to wake them up.
It's one of those areas that for me is so ambiguous at the moment. And I had gone almost exactly the other way, where I would trust the Claude Code harness to be my overall agent, almost the agent, no other agent files with identity. And I created loads of skills for different use cases and kind of trusted, look, the harness, it's got my Obsidian repository with all the information about me. It's smart enough to pick up what it needs when it needs it to inform how it uses a skill and be really effective. Then I asked one of the Claude Code team on this call, what do you know that we don't, that we should pay more attention to? And they were all in on agents. And I've ended up going the other way and rebuilding not everything as agents, but a lot of what were skills, like a kind of writing skill into an editor agent, where even then it was still using the skill to interview me, but it was the Claude Code harness directly using the skill to interview me. Whereas instead now it's an editor going through a loop of using the kind of questioning tool with me and doing the interview that way instead. And it's all, to be honest, it probably doesn't all matter that much with how things are right now. I wonder if the direction of travel is more that as agents become long lasting things, as your financial agent doesn't need to go to sleep anymore because he can wake up on a trigger to say everything's crashing, sell, 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 or whatever it may be. That might be why they're encouraging us in that direction. But who knows? That does seem to be what they're most interested in at the very least. But then it would
Yeah,
make them the most money.
it's not clear. Yeah, I think it's a combination of both because the more that I started working with multiple agents, the more had I, I had that need to go back and build orchestrating layers. And maybe that's the kind of evolution. You start with one agent, like you would start with your ChatGPT. Maybe you work with your projects in a way, but not a lot more granularity. But the moment that you're actually starting to code, that is where usually you spend hours working on something, and that agent needs to have its own context, needs to have its own kind of identity and history so it can operate effectively on its own. If you try to muddle things together, then yeah, I just think it would not be as productive in terms of time because some commands just take minutes to answer, so you can work on something else, and then you can move from agent to agent in an easy way. Whereas if I had it all in one Claude Code window, it would be a nightmare just to see like all the different activity. How do I scroll back? What did I do there? Where did I go forward? It would be a lot more complicated. So, but yeah, there's something about both worlds that you need to go about. And as I will say with many of these things, there's going to be a lot of theories and schools of thought about this, but it's got to work for you. So try it out. You will make mistakes for sure, and learn from them and move forward.
think that's what is so vivid right now. Like when we go to the events, there is something about the way people talk and feel when they are making something that has been missing for a very long time for most people. Most work has been working around stuff instead of being like in the guts of the thing and having something to show for it. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so exciting and why I love having these conversations. But look, Kim, thank you for joining us today and for this conversation. I think it's just another really interesting lens into how all this works, how you do it, that I think other people can learn from. So thank you. And I hope we'll see you again at Claude Code Curious very soon.
My pleasure. Tuesday next week. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Kim.